being told right now, and it has been confirmed by Austin Police Department's Public Information Officer, Scott Perry, confirming that a small plane has crashed into the Echelon building. A small plane crash into a building, something we don't see in Austin, Texas. This plane came in at a relatively high rate of speed and flying very low.
Nothing is going to change unless there is a body count. He apparently was so obsessed with fighting the tax man that he took his own life, authorities say, after setting his own home on fire. But Joe Stack didn't appear to be angry to some people who knew him. He played music in a band with a group of guys. Could you see this type of behavior festering in a person? Why would someone do this? Joe's friend and bandmate Rick Furley joins us now. Rick, did you ever see this kind of anger exhibited?
Never, and I couldn't have imagined it.
How did you get the word? I mean, how did you find out that he was the pilot who was involved here?
I got a personal phone call from the guitarist, and he told me. And that was the only way. I wasn't able to listen to the news up until later in the afternoon, so all the information I was getting was firsthand.
So when you guys would get together at a gig or at a practice or anything like that, he never mentioned the IRS, never mentioned that he was angry at the government?
I never heard him speak of anything other than music. And this is just so mystifying to me.
Seemed like a regular guy?
Very regular. Just a guy you want to be around. His company was very enjoyable, very intelligent, and he was a good musician.
You know, it's just so awful to think that not only did he take his own life, but there was apparently one other victim killed as well, someone who worked in that IRS office.
And I think we're lucky that more people didn't perish. I think we're fairly fortunate that it wasn't far worse of a situation.
Joe Stack, guy that had it with a lot of different facets of government. The news really talked a lot about him being upset with the IRS and taxes and stuff like that. But if you read his manifest, there was a whole lot of things that he was upset with. And pretty much everybody had the same idea that it was a horrible platform that he took. And what I ended up pretty much getting out of it is that regardless of what side of the Joe fence you sat on, if you even sat on a side, the part that brought everybody together, finding out that each other actually had the same views, the same ideas, the same problems with government, the same issues with the economy. And a lot of those people actually were from all different political parties, cultures, etc. It was really kind of fascinating what came out of it, the silver lining, if you will.
So many people talk about that we need to have sort of a Martin Luther King stance on peaceful revolution. And I totally agree and totally love that. I also know that that is a pacifistic way to keep us happy with our resistance without causing change. In other words, we spend a lot of time feeling good that we're doing something nonviolent and have a voice, but it doesn't make enough change. It seems that any revolution that's consistent with a great change has come with armed conflict. As much as it isn't wanted, it's unfortunately a necessary byproduct from our seceding from England's rule to most other great political escapes from tyranny. There's been issues of violence with it. I'm not saying that that should be our first outcome. We should do sort of like what the forefathers of the country did and say, this is the change we need, and we're making it. And when they take the steps to retaliate, we can't sit aside and say we're going to just sit down and kumbaya. Sooner or later, we're going to have to do something to defend what we believe in besides pen and ink. But I am a pacifist. Being a pacifist is good when there's nothing that needs to be fought for. There comes a time when pacifism is not going to be effective in effecting change. And I hate that. I truly hate it.
First of all, the idea of pacifism equates that there's weakness in non-aggression, and it's the most powerful stance to take. You only have to look at historically the stance that India took and the actions of Gandhi. It was completely non-violent in dealing with one of the great superpowers of the world at the time, Great Britain. And the civil rights movement and the activism that was non-violent protest actually did work and had an effect without resorting to violence. The truth is, regardless of how much you hate it or not, violence will only beget more violence. You know, if you overthrow by violent means a coup or have a coup to overthrow the powers that be or any governmental organization, invariably that creates more bitterness because it creates an us versus them and a winners and losers mentality. And that is a psychic bubble that is just waiting to fester or, begins to fester and waiting for its opportunity to burst again. And all you have is a perpetuation of the same mentality that created the problem that we're in the first place. The solution is never violence. As much as people are angry, there's better ways to be active. Being a pacifist doesn't mean that you don't do things. It just means that you don't resort to violence to get your point across. The moment that you resort to violence, you've already lost the battle. You've lost the battle with yourself, and no matter who ends up being the victor, you're going to end up with resentment, which is going to have a whole nother generation that's growing up with a negative viewpoint, and it's just going to perpetuate an endless cycle. I mean, we've seen that throughout history. So if ever there was a time to change that cycle of violence and violent rebellion, it's now. There are plenty of ways to get the word out and to motivate people, and invariably the government is run by people, and the military is run by people that have families in this country. In terms of people revolting against the powers that be, against our government, what are they going to do? Wield the military against all of us if we stood up in unison? It's not going to happen, because those people that are in the military have families here, and they're not going to wage war on their own families. Intelligent dialogue ultimately will win. It has to come from a place of genuine understanding and enlightenment. Otherwise, we're just doomed to repeat the same mistakes over and over again in perpetuity.
We do live in a culture that is very, as I often am guilty of saying, it's very linear, very dualistic in its framework and its mindset. And you see that in a number of facets of society. In this issue, what we're finding a lot with the dialogue that's happening because of Joe Stack is that we tend to think one way or the other. Either we have to condone this violent act or we have to dismiss it as nut job. And I think that the truth is much more complex than that.
When you look at history, people pick an agenda and they fight to the death for it because that is supposed to denote some type of real passion and real belief in what you're striving for because you're willing to die for it. But living by the sword and dying by the sword, that type of thought process has been the demise of civilizations as far back into recorded history as can be traced. Continuing this thinking and these patterns only causes history to repeat itself. There is not an argument alive that is going to sway me to the belief that the actions Joe Stack took can be justified in any way, shape, or form. There were many people injured, one man killed. He was a son, he was a father, he was a grandfather, he was an uncle, a brother. People cared about him. And regardless of how we view how evil the IRS may be or how corrupt our government may be, that gentleman happened to be one of us. He just happened to be going to work and trying to make his way in this world. And there is never a time where somebody's beliefs trump the rights of somebody else to be alive.